Hello and welcome to this lock-in at the Crate and Crowbar with me, Marsh the Fast Davis, and him, Graham the Furious Smith.
Hello.
Hello, Graham. I love you for doing this terrible thing to yourself with me. I've always held you as a dear friend, but I feel like what we've achieved today has brought us that much closer. A sort of Thelma and Louise moment, really.
I feel like there were other people in the car when we started. That's the thing. And
they've all fallen out. They bailed.
They jumped out while the car was in motion and rolled dramatically to a halt as we careened over the side of the cliff and exploded.
In our souped-up neon green Honda Civic, no doubt. And yet, can you really call anyone a friend until you've blown yourself up in a giant cinematic bin? So just to be clear, what we have done is we've made a pact to watch all of the Fast and the Furious movies. And the reason why we did we do this? Why would we ever do this?
It started by us watching better franchises. Like, we started off watching the Bourne films and the Mission Impossible films. I don't know how the Fast Saga became the next on our list.
I think I was tricked into it. I feel I'd heard from other people who I used to respect that the Fast films had sort of become Mission Impossible basically now. That they might have started off as these like crummy micro-budget crime films about shit cars and the arseholes who drive them. But then they become, like, over time, these ludicrous action spectacles that were actually unironically worth watching. And that's not true. That's not in any way true, as it turns out. These are empty films in which the expensive set pieces exist without any kind of peril or purpose and are housed within narratives that are incoherent and artless. And that's just, that's what's waiting for us across this 10-movie, excoriating, agonizing experience.
Well, let's start by talking a little bit about our histories with the series, or whether we had any history with the series. Had you seen any Fast and the Furious film before starting on this journey?
No. Had you?
I had seen a little bit of Tokyo Drift on television one time.
And that wasn't enough to stop you?
I turned it off quite quickly. But like you, I'd heard that, the later films get good, and everyone spoke mockingly, but then also sincerely about how they had become films about, a sense of family among the characters. And so I assumed that there must be, charming actors in them, and that they would be otherwise, facile and shallow action movies. But I like dumb action fare. Yeah. I'm absolutely okay with that. I kind of want to at least establish that up front. These should be movies I like. And yet I don't.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that's difficult about it, is because I think one of the things would be interesting to explore across the course of dunking on these films relentlessly will be why they are so much worse than otherwise superficially similar nonsense action spectacles like the Mission Impossible series. But we'll get into that. And in fact, just for anybody who's wondering why we're not talking about video games today, the gaming podcast, as explained in the last episode of the Crate and Crowbar, has now moved to a monthly format, a fortnightly format. And in the off weeks, we're doing these sort of single topic lock-ins that might focus on a single subject. Could be gaming related, could be an exhaustive catalogue of the worst, most despicable, meritless film franchise that has ever existed. So start as you don't mean to go on. Start with a big fucking mistake. That's what they say, isn't it?
Well, we can pretend that you started with that the Green Knight chat, the three of you had, which was, drawing from your academic experience in medieval literature and very well informed, and dealing with this really interesting piece of historic poetry.
In many ways, the natural continuation of that is the Fast franchise.
Yes, exactly.
Should we just dig into the first film? I think we'll get to some of the kind of big themes that I want to talk to you about as we go through. But let's just start. So the inaugural film, The Fast and the Furious, as it was called, in 2001. directed by Rob Cohen, written by a bunch of screenwriters, one of whom, David Ayer, also wrote Training Day and then directed the bad Suicide Squad film. And it focuses on our hero, unexpectedly called Brian. Brian's a cop, and much like how James Bond got earmarked for the job in Casino Royale by being very good at poker, Brian is really, really good at being a douchebag piece of shit with a love of crap-looking vehicles. So he's the natural choice to sort of go undercover with this gang of petrol heads, drag racing petrol heads, with the hope of busting open this ring of automobile hijackers who may or may not be led by the charismatic beef homunculus, which is Dominic Toretto, played well actually by Vin Diesel. And what follows is basically exactly the same plot as Point Break, but with drag racing instead of surfing. Point Accelerate, if you will. That's a really good joke. Anyways, it's not a great film. At one point, Brian, which eats a sandwich, and one of the other characters says, "Is this guy sandwich crazy or what?" And I think that's actually probably the high point of the film script. So, what did you make of this little cinematic gem, Graham?
Well, I mean, I related to that moment. I have myself been sandwich crazy many times in my life when we used to go to Time in Bath to get a roast sub.
Oh, I love that lady with the jowls who used to dig her big beefy hands into the huge pit of Stilton, and without gloves, and just crumble it all over your baguette. Not necessarily into your baguette, just all over it.
She liked us. She would give us extra. That was nice. I miss her. So yeah, I related to that moment. This film is terrible. It's terrible in a way that I think it's different than the other films in the series. This is, as you say, it's trying to be Point Break, and it is trying to be quite serious and grown up. And as a result, it's deeply boring. It is extremely dull. You went straight in there by mentioning that Brian is a cop, but I seem to remember that's the thing you find out about 30 minutes into the movie. Like the first 30 minutes, he is just seemingly pursuing a woman who works in the sandwich shop and getting in pointless fights in the street, and then there's some street races, and the street races are pretty much all in a straight line. They don't really introduce corners until maybe halfway through the second film in the series, and so it's just and no one really has any motivation or charisma. You're supposed to have the sense that Vin Diesel has charisma and that Brian is being, lured into this life of crime, that, he's been sent in as an undercover cop, but he finds Vin Diesel so charming, and his complete waste of human friends that just hang around their house getting drunk and calling him names. He really wants to be part of that found family, but I don't buy any part of it whatsoever. I really was happy when this movie ended.
Should we talk about drag racing and why it's bad, both as a sport, as a culture, but particularly as like a cinematic exercise? I think, for a moment, I wasn't sure if I just found the film agonizingly boring because it was, dumb and derivative and predictable and lacking any kind of ounce of class, or whether it was sort of my fault for finding cars just to be uninteresting objects of themselves. I find it very difficult to fetishize or get excited about cars in general. It seems like getting excited about a fridge or something, only less exciting because men are really super aggressively into them in a slightly unappealing way. And also there's possibly a class thing going on there. Am I just too middle class to get it? But you know what? I don't think I am the problem. I'm going to absolve myself. This is my podcast. I can do what I like. I think I do like films where cars do things that cars do not normally do, I am into cars to that extent. But with drag racing, the idea is just to drive the cars, as you say, in a straight line. And then somebody presses a nitro button and they go a bit faster and they win. I don't know what that is, why that would be a sport, but it's certainly not at all cinematic. And you can't build an exciting set piece around that. It's just impossible, I think.
I do think other movies that are about cars and the way that this film is about cars, they tend to use the cars as they build a spiritual connection. If you watch the Gone in 60 Seconds remake, the way Nicolas Cage talks about cars in that film and his relationship with a car that, only he can start. He can feel the engine as he's driving it and know what's wrong with it. And, it's about that
cars
bond.
As horses, basically.
Yeah, cars as horses. Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. Or the other film I really like is Speed Racer, which is... the Wachowskis, it's hard to describe. It's a brightly colored, anime-inspired movie about a man who's literally called Speed Racer. Which isn't quite as ridiculous in a world in which Vin Diesel is an actual person that exists, but and his dad is called Pop Racer in the movie. But it uses driving as a sort of metaphor for a creative pursuit, it's a form of self-expression, the way that the characters drive in these movies. And so they can build within it the kind of character journey that you get in lots of other, coming of age movies, or, even something like The Matrix, where there's a sort of character arc that maps on to Neo also becoming more powerful with Kung Fu. They just do the same thing, but with cars. The Fast and the Furious, certainly the first film, but throughout the series, they don't do that at any point. The way that they talk about cars is the way that, Forza Motorsport talks about cars. They are in these early movies quite interested in the engines and in the parts of the engines. And as you say, in NOS, they all talk about NOS and what kind of canister that they're putting in their cars. And it's like, that's not like character defining. I'm not learning anything about these people. When they win, it just feels like it's the machine. Vin Diesel loves to say throughout all of these films that, it's not the car that makes the man, it's the man that makes the car, or the driver that makes the car, or whatever. But no, that's absolutely not true. These it's the cars. It's you pressing the button. There's maybe a little bit of a choice about when you pressed it, which they get into in later films. But, but there's not much more to it than that.
Yeah. We will get into it in later films, but it is remarkable how sparse those sequences are, such that the addition of like a shot of a button being pressed is like a real kind of cinematic upgrade. But I do like Vin Diesel in this film. I get the sense that you didn't.
I like Vin Diesel more than any other character in the film. Oh, yeah. Like as an actor, there is, he is watchable. There is a charisma there. I don't remember him being particularly likable in this film. He's weirdly protective of his sister. His best friends are just despicable people that I can't understand why anyone would want to talk to. Never mind, like, sit in the same room as. Like, some of them are, you get the sense that they haven't washed in a while.
I feel like he's still at this stage of his career. I don't think the series has done him any favors as an actor, actually. But I think back then he was still sort of had an afterglow of charisma from some of his other roles. Like I've always quite liked him. I saw him first in Boiler Room, which is a film about a dodgy investment brokerage, and he's really good. Like, it's not a huge role; it's a supporting role, but it is a sort of interesting one because he's like one of the few people at this dodgy firm of assholes, basically, who can be redeemed. Like, he's part of this macho bro culture, but at the same time, you find out he still lives with his mum, and he's sort of like defensive about it. And there's this kind of sensitiveness to him, which you don't really associate with Vin Diesel in his latter day films. But like, there is this sort of ambiguity to Diesel, I think, as a performer, where he can be like frattish, or he can be like sensitive or steely. And then I actually did work at Shepperton Studios when they were doing the special effects for Pitch Black, the first Pitch Black film. And that's another ambiguous role. I'm a big fan of the Riddick games too. And he can, even in this, execrable film, he still manages to be quite charming, but also potentially dangerous. And he can like break out this sort of like, boyish charm, or he can seethe, or he can scowl, or he can, fix you with a cold steel stare as required. And I think that is like inherent to him. That's not really a part of the film. I think he has brought something useful to this otherwise terrible film, which should surely have ended everybody's careers. But somehow the opposite happened.
See, I agree with that. I think I like Vin Diesel in this film. I just don't like Dominic Toretto in this film. And I like Vin Diesel better as a result in the later movies. Some of the later movies I like less than I like this one. But Vin Diesel is better in them because he is not surrounded by the people or in the same setting as he is here. And I like him as a performer. I've seen him in other movies, including other execrable trash like the XXX action movies where he plays Xander Cage, the extreme sports spy. Which I went to the cinema to see. At age 16 or 17 or something. That's not good films, but he is good in them. He does carry them quite well. And of course he does a good voice of giant robots and also trees.
True. Yeah. Do you want to move swiftly on to Too Fast, Too Furious?
Yeah, so Too Fast, Too Furious. This is probably, the high point for my respect for Vin Diesel, in that Vin Diesel read the script for this film and said, "No, this is shit. I'm not going to be in it." And by the sounds of it, I've been reading around it. I'm sure it was somewhat ego-driven, and I think he's admitted to the fact that it was somewhat ego-driven. Like the film, with the script that they wrote with Dominic Toretto in it, he felt was not further developing the Toretto family saga, and so for that reason, he didn't want to be in it. He chose instead to go and make Chronicles of Riddick, the Riddick sequel, which was a good choice, I think. Although I do think it probably lumbered what was probably truly a bad script, with becoming an even worse script. So Too Fast, Too Furious, and I'll come back to the name in a bit. It was directed by John Singleton, who is best known for Boys in the Hood. And I think he's a pretty good choice for directing this film. Like if you've seen the first one, it is about that kind of LA criminal gang. There's a community. Someone with like John Singleton could have come in and given, I think, extra credibility to a project like that. Unfortunately, that's not what the film is about. It's about Brian going undercover again, this time in Miami, to investigate a completely unrelated drug kingpin. Who's running an operation down there, and he has to, he's asked. So at the end of the first film, we should set this up a little bit more. Do we want to give spoiler warnings, or are we just going all the way in with spoilers?
Oh no, just go for it.
So at the end of the first film, just like in Point Break, Paul Walker lets Vin Diesel go. And so as Too Fast, Too Furious starts, he is no longer a cop, but he gets drafted back in as a disgraced former LAPD officer to go undercover. He says he will do it, but he'll only do it if he can bring his own partner with him and choose who it's going to be. And he chooses Roman. Is it Roman Pearce?
I don't remember his surname. I try not to think about him.
Yes, it's Roman Pearce. So he chooses Roman Pearce as that he'd be the only man that he would trust to go undercover with. He's someone that Brian knew when they were younger. They committed some car thefts together, and Roman went to prison for all those crimes. So the officers that are asking Brian to go undercover don't like this idea, but he says it's the only way he'll do it. Presumably in the original script, this would have been Dominic Toretto. I'm going to partner with Dominic Toretto to go undercover, but Vin Diesel not being available, in steps Tyrese Gibson. And so Roman is introduced quite well, I think. They go to a demolition derby to find him, where Roman is wearing like an ankle bracelet. He's not allowed to stray too far away from his home, and so he has positioned his home basically in the car park of this demolition derby. So we get introduced to him as like, he can drive, he's skilled at stealing cars. He and Brian have like personal history because Roman feels betrayed by Brian, that and thinks that Brian grassed him into the cops basically, and that's why Roman went to prison, although that's not true, as they find out later. And so they immediately have a fight, and so like this is quite a decent introduction to what will become I think one of the most despicable depictions of a human being ever committed to film over the course of the following 8 films. But I don't mind this as an introduction. So off they go to Miami, where they meet pretty quickly the drug kingpin, played by Cole Hauser, who additions a group of goons by making them go on a dangerous attention-grabbing race so that he can see how good they'll be at the kind of discreet missions that he needs them to go on as a drug kingpin. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's just an excuse to have another car race. They also meet Eva Mendes, who is a much better actress than this film deserves, and she is not well served by the plot. She is also an undercover agent, already undercover with this drug kingpin. Why do they need to send in Brian as well? It's not entirely clear. Brian, who, we didn't mention this, but in the first film, when he goes undercover with Dom, he immediately becomes infatuated with Mia, Dom's sister. And ultimately, over the course of the series, they will have a long-term relationship. But Brian, now being undercover in a different place, immediately starts a relationship with Eva Mendes' character. Because just any woman he sees, I guess, at this point is good enough. Someone who sells him sandwiches, someone who he could be brutally murdered for even looking at wrong, sure, whatever. Anyone will do. And this film is, I think, it's worse. It's worse than the first film. I was, I think, more negative about the first film than you were. I think the first film, its biggest crime was that it was boring. This film is boring, but I think it also fails more fundamentally in terms of its structure and its dialogue, and its action scenes are worse. You feel Vin Diesel's absence here, basically. Like his ability to carry that first film, his charisma, his genuine sense of threat around Paul Walker is not carried by the new drug kingpin character. You don't get any sense of that from this new guy. And the action sequences are all, I would say, generously, I would say that they were low budget. They might just be badly edited and badly shot, because certainly the later films have a big budget and still have some of these same problems. But there are a ridiculous number of cutaways to gear changes in this film. Like, they will be driving down a highway, and I swear by the end of it, they must be in like 13th gear from the number of times that Singleton will cut to Brian, moving into a new gear, and the engine noise playing over the top of it being pitch shift a little bit higher to like communicate that they're going faster, even though they don't actually show you the cars going faster or anything really happening other than that. How do you feel about this film?
Oh, well, not good, Graham. I mean, so there's 3 questions here. Is this a better film than the first one because it has EMP harpoons? Is this a better film because they somehow magically seem to summon infinite cars for an audacious but completely pointless, as it turns out, sequence? Is this a better film because they ramp off a highway and onto a boat? And somehow the answer to all these questions is no. And that is really remarkable. By all kind of cinematic maths, this should be a better film just because of those set pieces, but it isn't. None of it makes really any sense. I don't know if that's what you come to these films for, but like, just there's so many times that these undercover dudes, their police handlers, see them get into a car, which is literally what they've been hired by the police to do, and then immediately assume they're escaping rather than just driving somewhere. And I think it's like, this happens like 3 times. Like, they're rearrested by their own handlers like 3 times for doing things that they've literally been employed by their handlers to do. And it's just, it's just complete nonsense. And there's a bit where, to escape the police again, they drive into a garage, which just seems to contain the entire motoring populace of Miami. And then all of these people just decide to be part of this massive distraction tactic, which looks cool from a drone shot, all these cars driving out of this garage. But then they're like immediately arrested, and it didn't even matter. It's just toss. It's absolute toss. And you know, for the crime of introducing Roman, which is, you know, who's the most disgusting characters who have ever been conceived for the screen, I don't think there's any punishment too great. Yeah, he's just a witless, capering, misogynistic dirtbag who should be fired into space. More on that later. I will say that I do quite like Cole Hauser.
Really?
He's not particularly good in this film, but he is mean and beautiful. And I sort of forgive him for his role in this hateful film. And also, it's got a bunch of other good bit parts as well. Like Tom Barry is in it, and
James Remar.
Ted Levine was in the first film, who I really like. And yeah, James Remar sort of. It's weird. They sort of like strangely seem to swap roles. Like, I think Ted Levine is like the hard ass in the first film. And then sort of Tom Barry becomes the hard ass in this film, or is it vice versa? I forget. Anyway, there's some little bit parts in it which aren't disgusting to me, but on the whole, pretty disgusting.
Yeah, and it like I also wanted to highlight the bit parts because I do think they're good, but I'm surprised that you like Cole Hauser. I mean, I guess I haven't seen him in much else, but in this film, I don't think he's good. I don't think he has the requisite charm or charisma to play the kind of role that he's playing, because he's not. He's meant to be not only, you know, threatening and menacing and terrifying. You know, I think the closest you get to see him actually do something evil is, I think he puts a bucket over someone's head with a rat inside it. Maybe, which isn't, you know, a particularly menacing scene, really. But he's also supposed to be, you know, charming. He's kind of won over Eva Mendes. You're not supposed to know whether she's maybe switched allegiances fully, or whether she's still a trustworthy undercover cop, or, you know, what's going on there. But it falls down because the villain doesn't work for me. And yeah, Roman does, like, after those first 15 minutes where I'm like, okay, I get why this guy's here. He is despicable. And we didn't really talk about it in the first film, but both of these films, their treatment of women is utterly despicable. And I think Too Fast, Too Furious is worse for that. Like, this is worse for having Brian and Roman walk into a party that's just filled with bikini models gyrating, and they all love them because they own cars.
And yet, it's not the low point in that regard for the series.
No, I think maybe the next film is the low point for that. Shall
we do it? Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's move on. I guess the last point I'd make is I feel like Too Fast, Too Furious does at least. I don't know if this isn't to its credit. This is another negative point, but it sets up the series for what it's going to become. Like you mentioned the fact that it's got heat-seeking harpoons or whatever. I think at one point they jerry-rig an ejector seat into their car, which is quite James Bondy. Like, it's starting to introduce gadgets, which do appeal to me more than just cars in their base state. And also, I wanted to flag the name. The fact that it's called Too Fast, Too Furious. I feel like the Fast and the Furious series, its names have a kind of mimetic quality to them. It's because they're stupid, but like there's a certain type of name which you can identify as, oh, that name sounds like a James Bond film. Quantum of Solace is quite a nonsense name, but, it does sound like the name of a James Bond film. There's a quality of name which is like, yeah, that feels like the name of a Star Wars movie. I think the Fast and the Furious series actually has the same thing, and I think it starts in part here with Too Fast, Too Furious. But yeah. So moving on to the third film, which has a title which I also think is, in keeping. It feels like a name for this series. It's Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift.
Yeah. Directed by the director who'll come to direct many of these films, Justin Lin, who outside of the Fast and the Furious franchises directed Star Trek Beyond. And a couple of True Detective episodes from the beloved season 2. So there you go. Yeah, and also Chris Morgan is the guy who picks up the sort of writing duties here, who's, I don't know, not really known for much else out of the Fast and the Furious. He wrote the adaptation of Mark Millar's Wanted comic, which also wasn't very good. Anyway, what's weird about this film is that it completely switches its entire cast and location. We have a new protagonist entirely, a 17-year-old bro called Sean, played by the 24-year-old Lucas Black, who looks easily 30 years old. I don't know his origin story as an actor, and I feel a little sorry for saying this, but it's sort of like his animations haven't loaded in. There are some scenes where he would probably be more convincing if he just sort of like slid through them in T-pose. It's genuinely one of the most inexplicable casting choices since Jake Lloyd, I would say. It's really baffling. But anyway, he's a kid apparently, and he's been relocated to Japan by his dad for reasons I don't care to remember. Japan here is obviously not Japan at all, but nonetheless, he ends up learning and finding solace in the drag racing community and learning the sacred art of this enigmatic and dangerous people, which is going round a corner. And it's all part of it's not a crime caper really. The Yakuza do turn up like an hour in, but most of it's just a really bland high school underdog story, which isn't in any way an improvement. What did you make of it, Graham? Are the car races better for the new and stunning addition of being able to go round corners sometimes?
Yes. Yeah, I do think the car races are better because they've got corners in them. But the protagonist is, I think, a new low for the series. Like, Paul Walker is not... We didn't really talk about him. We talked about the charisma of Vin Diesel. He's not in Tokyo Drift either. He's still not... Well, actually, he does turn up at the very end. We'll come back to that. But Paul Walker is not a great actor by any means. He does, however, have... I don't know. He feels very much like a budget movie star. Like, Paul Walker does okay. Like, he, if you can't afford... Like, if you really can't afford Keanu Reeves, then yeah, put Paul Walker in your movie. He'll do fine. He can read the lines and seems okay, I suppose, most of the time. Whereas everything about this new guy is terrible. As you've said, the actor, but also the way they introduce him as a character. I don't understand why they've written any of these scenes. He's introduced as being... he's troubled at school. He gets involved in this race, like a drag race through a housing development with I guess, the school bully. And the school bully has a woman, I guess a fellow student in his car who says something along the lines of, "Winner gets me, boys," before the race begins. Just, setting out its stall right at the beginning in the opening minutes. Protagonist is like, great, I love to win women in car races, I guess. They zoom off. Protagonist guy crashes his car through a house, just like totals someone's half-built home. Does not make me like him or make me think he's cool. He then crashes his car completely. So I think he's bad at the thing he's supposed to be good at and is a terrible person. he gets, and then at that point, that's when he gets pulled into the police station and given the option that all juvenile delinquents are given, which is either you can go to prison or you can go to Tokyo. And so he chooses Tokyo, as many do, off to the prison island of Tokyo. And then at that point, like, when he arrives in Tokyo, he almost instantly falls into the car culture there and is just given incredibly expensive-looking sports cars by strangers he meets, which he then proceeds to crash into every vertical surface. like it's not just that this film introduces corners to the races. I feel like it's introducing corners to the protagonist, like he's not seen them before. Because like in that opening race in Tokyo, which I think is through like a parking garage or something like that, he just grinds his car like a skateboard against every single surface.
Well, it's like they're trying to elevate the idea of cornering into some sort of mysticism, like something you can only attain from the wise people of the Orient. And, it just isn't. Fuck off.
I mean, that's almost what I was we're talking about in the first film. It was like, talking about cars as metaphors rather than taking them literally as, just isn't it great that we can press a button and they go a bit faster than they were before. And so, but it's not presented well, and it's the fact that it's just literally going around corners.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does have an advantage of the preceding films by having cars turn. Like, I do think that really mixes things up. But it just the same problems benight these films' action sequences in the cars, where it's like really badly composited shots of CG cars drifting through CG Tokyo, and it always cuts back to the gear stick or a gurning face rather than trying to establish like the continuity of space and time. Like, where are these cars, in relation to each other, or indeed the road or anything? You just don't get a sense of it, and it has this. All of these films have this really strict shot formula where you get like a shaky cam shot of the car bonnets nosing in front of one another. Then there's a shot of the villain sneering. Then there's a shot of a gear stick shifting aggressively. Then, the one car gains on the other and the hero goes, "Oh, hell no." And the gear shifts again. And then, and then it repeats for like 90 minutes or something. And then the villain finally looks set to win. And the hero goes, "Oh, hell no" again, and presses a button and the hero wins. And that's literally every single car race in this franchise up until maybe film 6. It's not, there's nothing about it, which is exciting. I don't understand it.
It's also this. It feels like the point where the series is the most obsessed with cars and car culture generally. Mm. Like, it's almost like have you seen the Sex and the City films?
I have to say I missed out on those. Sorry, Jeremy.
Well, the Sex and the City, the first film, has this kind of approach, which is like it's partly fantasy fulfillment for its audience. So there are long montages in that film where Carrie and the gang go shopping and you just get to watch them try on clothes, and the clothes are very expensive and they're brand names. And I suppose that's part of what the audience wants. And like Tokyo Drift is the equivalent, but with cars. Like, there are so many like slow panning shots of fancy sports cars in garages in Tokyo where it's lingering over this expensive hardware that we're presumably supposed to be impressed and excited by, but it's just a fucking car. I'm not into cars on that level, and so it's like this feels like a film for car fetishists or hobbyists or whatever else you want to call it. And I don't necessarily begrudge them. I do begrudge them that a little bit because, climate disaster and all of that. But yeah, it just doesn't work for me. And I do think the protagonist here is just utter trash. Like, I really didn't think I would miss Paul Walker ever, but I do miss him in this film. And then at the end, Vin Diesel does show up. So I don't know why. Maybe he'd already.
He must have signed like a deal halfway through the filming of this to come back and rescue the franchise or something like that, and decided to they decide to thread back some continuity with some callback shot at the end. I don't know what the story is, but it feels quite out of place. And in fact, it's so out of place that the subsequent 3 films, I think, have to take place before Tokyo Drift in order for them to make sense of anything that's going on. Should we? Do you want to hit me with Fast and the Furious? Your synopsis of that.
Yeah, I want to say you talk about Vin Diesel coming back to rescue the series.
Well,
so Too Fast, Too Furious had a budget of $76 million. It made $236 million. Mm-hmm. So that's the movie without Vin Diesel in it at all. And then Tokyo Drift, budget $85 million, box office $158 million. Mm. So you remove Paul Walker and set it in Tokyo, and I guess fewer people show up, but it's still making double its budget.
Oh, right, but maybe that's on the basis of the previous film. Maybe it would never make that maybe the next film, Son's Paul Walker, Son's Diesel, would not
perhaps
would not make the same bucks. I don't know.
And I do think Vin Diesel's absence from these 2 films, it does change the narrative around the series, that instead of it dribbling away to become, I think if Vin Diesel had been in Fast and the Furious 2 and Fast and the Furious 3, then that would have been it. Like, that would have been the end of the series. It was a trilogy. Maybe it continued to be successful, but at that point, they're probably all too expensive for it to continue, or it just, the actor support of it at that point. Whereas Fast and the Furious 4, Vin Diesel comes back, Paul Walker comes back, all of the original cast, so Michelle Rodriguez and Jordana Brewster come back as well. And it's like the heroes return. It's a proper Fast and the Furious film after the weirdness of the 2 before. Also returning are Justin Lin, as you mentioned, who directed Tokyo Drift, and Chris Morgan, who was the writer on that film. They become the kind of creative leads of this series going forward, I suppose. And so this is a film which I watched, and I'll be honest, I don't remember much of it. There's a middle period for these Fast and the Furious films, 4, 5, to a lesser degree 6, where I think they genuinely become better films, but I think they also in some ways become more forgettable films. But because they're not incredibly awful anymore, they're just ordinarily awful. They do not hold in the memory quite so much. But so this is set, as you say, it turns out Tokyo Drift was taking place far in the future, possibly like 15 years in the future after 1 and 2, because Fast and Furious, which is the 4th film, takes place 5 years after Toretto escapes from the US at the end of the first film. He's fled the country with his crew, and they're now living, him, Letty, and the other terrible people are living in the Dominican Republic. And also with them is Han, who was the kind of benefactor who helped Lucas Black in Tokyo Drift by giving him that sports car. That's the main reason why this film has to be a prequel to Tokyo Drift, because Han, it seems, is killed in a car crash. The most retcon scene of any scene in cinema history. They retcon that one scene where Han dies in a car crash like 4 times over the following movies. Han in this series, it's worth saying, is played by an actor called Sung Kang, who was in Justin Lin's indie movie debut. So it seems a lot like Justin Lin just likes this actor and that they're friends and have known each other for a long time, and he will do anything to make sure that his friend still has a job. So although we just saw him blow up and die, he's back. He's part of the gang with Letty and so on in the Dominican Republic. And at some point early in the film, Dom realizes that Letty, his girlfriend, is going to have to spend her entire life running from the law, and that this is no way for them to live, and it's all because of Dom and his actions. And so he decides that he's going to flee in the middle of the night and leave his crew behind, so that they can go back to America without him and resume their normal lives, and he can just be on the run, his sad self. 3 months later, Dom gets a call from his sister to say that Letty is dead. Didn't work out so well. Dom left. All his criminal pals did not go back to America. They continued to be criminals, and Letty has been killed. And so Dom returns to America to investigate, basically, her murder. Meanwhile, Brian, also returning, he's no longer a police officer. He's now an FBI agent. Apparently, you just kind of fail upwards through the criminal system, which is fair enough. He's trying to track down a Mexican drug lord, and through machinations of plot, I can't quite remember, Brian and Dom end up teaming up. Oh, that's what it was. Letty was working undercover for Brian. And so she was killed by the criminal gang that Brian is investigating. Brian feels really responsible for Letty's death. It puts Dom and Brian back in a position where they have to interact again, but there's also this tension because does Dom blame Brian for this? Of course he does. Are they going to work it out? Who cares? And so on and so on. Well,
thanks for coming to the lock-in. That about sums it up.
Do you remember more of this film than I do?
Actually, no. As you're saying it, I'm like going, oh, maybe. I do. I mean, yeah. I mean, so I think it sort of gave. I remember it giving me false hope. This one because like the CG doesn't look very good anymore, but. And it's got this kind of cartoon physics that never really convinces. But like the opening stunt sequence, the film sort of cares that you understand what the sequence of events is. That causality feels vaguely important and that you know where one thing is in relation to another. And that is like an achievement well beyond anything that the preceding films have attempted. And then there's a foot chase sequence, which is like similarly kind of comprehensible, which is a start. And, I remember a good bit where Brian punts his quarry off a chain link fence just by sort of like body slamming into the other side. And it's you take what you can get from these films. And like,
yeah,
that's 3-second shot is quite good. And I wonder if like maybe getting a new editor helped because it's the same director as Tokyo Drift, but maybe the shots are being pasted together in post more kind of coherently. But it is unfortunately a false hope because the rest of the film is just like inert, dumb shit dialoguing, racing tryouts for gangsters, which seems to be the thing that everybody always does and doesn't make any sense. And there is more going on with the races there because they've got both turns now and also incoming traffic, which is a new thing. But there's still no spatial continuity communicated by like just the blizzard of cuts that occurs when anybody's racing. And I'm pretty sure at one point like a character gets absolutely fucking killed, like conclusively annihilated. And then a minute he's like neck and neck with Dom, and it's just it's sort of it's just exasperating. And the other thing about the cars, it almost feels redundant to note at this point, but the series has never once like convincingly justified the use of cars to do any of the crime things for which they've been commissioned. Like there's a car chase through a CG mine in this one, and it looks complete ass. It looks it feels just completely weightless. And there's just no effort to explain why it's happened. It's just the most indolent setup for a spectacle, which isn't even spectacular. And Brian continues to be a horrid character in this, worse than in the previous films as well. Like, I think they're trying to grow him as a character. So he starts out as this sort of like just empty vacuum mold for your common or garden dipshit. And now they're sort of trying to pour into this vacuum mold like an anti-hero edginess. But they've just made him an absolute prick. It doesn't give him depth. It just makes you hate him because he's just constantly petulant and he's stupid and he's corrupt. And like Vin Diesel can sort of like carry off that bad boy stuff, but I don't think Paul Walker can. I don't know if that's Paul Walker or just the terrible writing. Probably both. I mean,
you say that Vin Diesel can pull it off, and I do find him a charming actor. But this is, the beginning of this film. Letty is murdered. His whole motivation for this film is investigating her death, getting revenge or justice for her death. She's supposedly the love of his life. It still contains multiple scenes in which they go into parties filled with scantily clad ladies, and Vin Diesel is immediately cavorting with them and like, hey baby, that sort of stuff.
Women are either there to die, or they're there to be won as trophies, or they're there for the lads to sexually harass in funny ways. Funny in inverted commas.
Yeah. This also contains, I don't really remember anything about the villain. I remember Gal Gadot is in this film.
Yep.
Don't fully remember why. I remember her more in later films because she becomes a recurring character. I don't remember anything about the villain in this film, except for that he's a Mexican drug lord, and at one point he says, "We know so different," which is both a terrible cliche and, in the broken English, a bit racist.
Yeah, I think I'd actually mixed up the villain from that film with the next one, because I cannot picture the villain in now you mention it in the fourth film. But in Fast 5, I remember the villain is meant to be. It says a corrupt businessman in the Wikipedia summation, but I'm pretty sure he was also a cartel dude. Anyway, he sort of looks like Sean Pertwee, but he's not him. Should we move on to Fast 5? I'm conscious that there's another 6 films to go.
Yeah, let's plow on.
So Fast 5, director Justin Lin, writer Chris Morgan again. But the difference here is that Vin Diesel has taken over the production of the series at this point, and maybe that involves like a greater creative control, more stuff about Vin Diesel's lovely family. I don't know, probably an injection of cash because the big name star is now attached forever. I don't know.
Well, supposedly, we didn't mention it, but supposedly Vin Diesel did rewrites on the script for the original film. Either on set ad-libbing, but he said that he didn't think the script was very good, and so he added a lot of the edge and believability, he said, to the original script. So I think he's been creatively involved in all of the films he's actually starred in. But yes, his influence is obviously growing.
So this one actually takes place before the events such as they are of Tokyo Drift, and it begins with this prison bus break stunt, which is teased like at the conclusion of the previous film. I don't actually remember who is in the bus, who's incarcerated, but it doesn't matter. I think that the plot in this one, it's the car bros are going to try and steal $100 million from this cartel dude who looks a bit like Sean Pertwee, whilst being chased by a massive DEA agent in the shape of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Which sounds promising. The injection of another, mesmerizing star should be an uptick. But I have to say that promise is almost immediately squandered by the opening stunt, which just completely shits its pants. It's just like a shockingly anticlimactic moment, which is instantly implausible with this stupid outcome that is seemingly the opposite of the objective. Which would all be just part of the course, but it's followed by this lengthy exposition in the form of newsreel footage, which tells you how brilliant it was and how it wasn't stupid at all. Did you feel that the remaining 2 hours and 10 minutes of the film redeemed that hot piss, Graham?
No, I feel likewise to you. Like, The Rock is a good addition to this film. I think this is like the first movie in the series that it sort of feels like it brings all the disparate characters together, because Vin Diesel and Paul Walker are in it, but you also get Ludacris and Roman Pearce are both back. Gal Gadot is still in it. Han from Tokyo Drift is still in it. So it feels like they've established, a consistent universe, such as it is. But it also feels like you've got this weird mixture of, Vin Diesel, The Rock, Gal Gadot, quite charismatic actors mixed in with your Roman Pearces and your Ludacris's and like the lesser, more despicable characters from the more despicable should have been straight to video sort of films. And so like it's a really weird mixture.
I did enjoy this more than the previous films. Like, I mean, aside from that kind of disappointing opening sequence, there's like it's followed up by a train heist. It feels like the film is now about heists. That's what they're getting into.
Yeah.
And the bro boys steal these cars, which are stored within the train carriages, by peeling off the train side and yoinking them out onto this sort of janky, bouncy truck. Which is actually the only vehicle with any character in the entire series. It does blow up immediately after that, but but it's not. The sequence is it's a lot of fun. It's stupid, but everybody knows it. Like it sort of enjoys itself, and I almost did as well. There's some good punching in the film. There's some good jumping. Nobody presses a button to make a neon Subaru go zoom. So I mean, I think. The thing about this, I mean, maybe we'll get into this more as the film goes on, but like the heists are always just slightly not, even at their best, they never quite give enough of a shit about coherence to satisfy me as heists in other films do. So like there's just weird choices, like the car keys for these cars are stored behind sheets of glass on this train carriage, like they're alarms. And there's just no reason for that to be the case. Like, why didn't they just hotwire the cars? Or, wouldn't it be more fun if they'd lifted them from a DEA man further down the train or something? And I don't know. The DEA agents actually spot them by looking out the window of the train and at an angle which is impossible for them to have been seen. I don't know. It just feels like the filmmakers never care enough to spend the time solving problems with their situations. But the problems are what make heists interesting. Like what does Tom Cruise do when factor X is introduced or factor Y is removed? That's the fun of those films. And these films are just like, and then, like a breathless 3-year-old telling you some dream they had. It's And obviously they're cut together in a way which doesn't make any spatial sense. And it's a shame because there's actually some decent stunt work in here by credible stunt actors and a huge budget, but they often just waste it by chopping it into tiny pieces.
Yeah, I feel like cars at this point become the series' Achilles heel. Like they are trying to be a heist movie, but cars aren't good for most parts of a heist. And the need for every action sequence starts at 80 miles an hour, essentially. Whereas if you look at the heists in, say, a Mission Impossible film, there is real pacing to them. They spend quite a bit of time on the setup. They establish the stakes. There is maybe some like action beats and fighting, and then there's like maybe a bit of a stealthy, sneaky sequence. And because they've established the stakes at the beginning, when things go wrong, then you understand the tension of the moment. And then when they deal with that in some like larger than life, Tom Cruise jumping out of a skyscraper in Abu Dhabi sort of way, you feel that and it feels impactful. Whereas almost every heist in the Fast and the Furious series begins with them driving 6 cars at 80 miles an hour into a location in a way that alerts everyone there to what's going on. And so you can never have any kind of pacing moment. You can't even do exposition in progress. Like the exposition scene is always completely separate from the action scene. Like every James Bond film will have a moment where they're at the party for the evil villain's lair, and they're talking to each other over headpieces about, what the mission is and what the stakes are. You can't really do that when you've got 6 people in 6 separate cars and they're all driving extremely quickly. And so the exposition always happens in the scene before and is this kind of really long, laborious, slightly boring exposition scene. And so that then fails to kind of establish the stakes because they're describing things that you can't see yet, like you don't have a frame of reference for until it cuts into the next scene. And so you're having to do extra work as an audience member to like follow along with something that's being ill-explained and is utterly stupid and ridiculous. And I think when I watched Fast 5, the weirdest Enid Blyton adaptation I've ever seen. My feeling was, okay, the series has achieved a level of mediocrity now. Like, at this point, like, if I had watched Tokyo Drift or the original Fast and the Furious film on a plane, I would get 20 minutes in, I would turn it off, somewhat disgusted. I feel like Fast 5 I've reached the point where if I put this on the back of a seat in front of me, I would watch it to the end. It's a 5 out of 10 plane movie, I think, at this point.
That's I think you're overselling it. I do think the next film actually achieves a sort of it crosses the Mission Impossible 2 parity threshold, that's what I would say, to become sort of just frothy action nonsense. I enjoyed whole sequences of Fast and the Furious 6, actually. I actually enjoyed them. Imagine that. I didn't like the film overall, but I mean, yes. Take me into the world of Fast and Furious 6, Graham.
Well, Fast 5, so it had a budget of $125 million and it made $626 million. It was like almost double what the film had done before. That's what The Rock does for you. So that's context leading into Fast and Furious 6, which is again directed by Justin Lin and written by Chris Morgan, and stars pretty much all of the same people from the previous movie. Like, the gang has been established now, and if you liked any of these people, you would enjoy the fact that we're seeing them interact. It's kind of like if they made the Avengers movie before they made any of the individual movies, and then also all of the Avengers were cunts.
Yeah.
So this film it starts in a similar way to Fast and the Furious 4, where the gang are all living abroad in hiding after their successful heists. In Fast 5, the difference is now they're all millionaires. So, like, they were successful in their criminal endeavors in the last film, and so they're now exceptionally wealthy. They're all on the run, but all of them have bought fancy cars or have got fancy homes, and have kind of like started to pair off and going into hiding, which is kind of becomes a problem for the series because they don't have any motivation. Like, their motivation before was they're thieves and they're trying to steal things. Now they have no reason to actually steal things. Although in some respects you can argue that it makes it better because it does push it outright into spy stuff, because Owen Shaw is basically like a super villain.
I will say, okay, so I mean, I don't really remember what happens in this film apart from the fact that Luke Evans is in it as as some sort of rogue MI5 agent who's, I can't remember what his world-ending plan is, but the Fast and the Furious team, for some reason, are lured into tracking him down and stopping him. Quite why they've become like a global crime-fighting team now is not really well handled, but it doesn't really matter. I think like the action is just sufficiently better. It's grown broadly competent and sometimes cool. There's still too many cuts in all the fistfights, which do a massive disservice to the martial artists they now have on cast. And I think they just have too many cast members. Like, they're all having fights simultaneously. It just makes it hard to follow or care about anything that's happening. But the car chases are spatially and sequentially coherent, and there's a feeling of real danger and spectacle. There's a part where armored Formula One cars are used to kind of just drive under other cars, like Robot War, like Robot War's robots, and flip them. And that looks great and feels fun. And there's a sequence where a tank erupts from the back of a truck, which is great. And there are a few events which are just so outrageously dumb that I actually laughed out loud and clapped, which hasn't happened in any of the previous films. I really like the tank sequence, and it's like barely remarked upon huge civilian death toll that must have occurred. And there's a thing in the series where characters they treat cars as though they are like safety blankets, and characters are constantly being caught on the bumper on the bonnets of cars, as though that would save them in some way from like a 50-foot fall. But there's a sort of audacious stupidity to it, which I quite admire. I mean, if you're going to blow any sense of credibility, then why not do it that way?
Yeah, so I've caught up. The reason they do it is it's The Rock comes to them and says, "I need your help bringing down Luke Evans." And the reason you should do it is because if you do, I will get you amnesty for all your several crimes in the previous film, so you can come back home to America, even though you're, millionaire thieves that have killed several people across several nation states at this point. I can get you amnesty, apparently, if you catch this one man. But then Dom gets the extra motivation of being shown a photo of Letty, his supposedly murdered wife, who it turns out is alive, but seemingly working with this villain now for some reason. This starts a real trend for the series of any character who dies coming back a film or two later. And I feel like, yeah, I agree with what you're saying about the action set pieces in this being better and some of it being fun, but I still struggle to enjoy it because it's all so meaningless. As you say, like being able to catch people on car bonnets is ridiculous, but you got to describe that in more detail because specifically that's part of the tank sequence where I think they like tether the tank to a vehicle in order to like drag it over the side of this bridge. And Letty is thrown from a vehicle and is going to fall to her death, but Dominic Toretto flips his car over the gap between two roads and like catches her in midair on his car. Yeah. Like it's just the physics of it make no sense whatsoever, and so like it doesn't. I don't feel anything about it. Like I'm not tense watching it. I'm not excited watching it. It still feels like someone is just describing nonsense to me.
Yeah, I think you get maybe one of those per film. Like, I think you have to earn them though, and unfortunately, the whole of this series exists in that same level of unreality without consequence or peril, really. And so it doesn't, as stupid as it is, it doesn't feel like standout stupidity of the kind that should be celebrated. I don't know, but yeah, there's a sequence where Brian goes to prison. He goes to prison to infiltrate the prison, and I have no recollection of why he goes there or what he learns there. And the weird thing is, neither does the film, because it clearly doesn't matter, because nobody bothers to ask him ever why he went to the prison and what he found out. And they should have just left him there, really.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he goes to interrogate someone there, but they end up getting the information a different way anyway, and so that whole sequence is completely pointless. There are some moments I like. I like when the plane explodes at the end and Dom drives his car out the back of it. And the hand-to-hand combat is better this time around. It does help that they've got like Gina Carano, for example. She can fight, and the series is really lacking in people who can sell a punch. And part of the reason a lot of the time, you've talked about how there's lots of cutting and you can lose sense of the continuity. Sometimes I think that's because in the early films they didn't have the budget to show the chases in full. In some of these later films where there's more personality or hand-to-hand based combat, a lot of the time I think they're cutting because the actor doing the move can't actually do the move.
Yeah.
You get a lot of that in, I feel like, the next film when Shaw's brother is introduced with a much better actor. Or at least more charismatic performer.
I even though I forgot his name, I quite like Luke Evans as an actor. But anyway, yes, Furious 7, as it was called. James Wan is the director now, who's the horror impresario known for, I think, co-creating Saw, Insidious, and The Conjuring. I think he also directed one of the Aquaman films, which was okay. And the series has sort of finally straightened out its timeline now, because this is actually I think this is the first film set after Tokyo Drift. So Han is dead at this point, and Deckard Shaw, who is Jason Statham, the brother of the antagonist of the preceding film, has in fact now been retconned to be the killer of Han in the previous film. I think we previously thought he just crashed, but now it's shown that in some way Jason Statham blows up his car. And he does that because he's out for revenge against Dominic Toretto and his crew because they nobbled his brother and put him on a life glug in the last film. And that's sort of the plot, really. Do you need more plot when you have Jason Statham to cyclone kick men through desks? I don't know. I don't know that you do. What do you think, G?
I don't think that you do either.
It also has a big. Sorry, it has the main selling point of this film is that The Rock and Statham throw a lot of office furniture at each other, and that's great to watch. And it's really impressive that they find ways to like hospitalize The Rock without ever impugning his ability, because clearly it's in his contract that he couldn't be beaten by anybody. But so they find kind of like slightly kind of sideways ways of taking him out of the picture.
Yeah, we're speeding through these, although maybe it doesn't feel like that if you're listening to it and you're more than an hour into listening to talk about the Fast and Furious films. But like, he is taken out of commission because he saves his fellow agent, and that fellow agent is the woman that Dom was dating for several movies when he thought Letty was dead. Now, in the previous film, he discovered that Letty is still alive, and she switches sides. Although she still has amnesia, she doesn't have any memories of their previous relationship, and so this woman just gracefully steps aside because it's important that women are just props on the journey for men. But she does at least, become a kind of cool cop until she gets immediately thrown out of a window and saved by The Rock like 5 minutes into this movie. And yeah, like Statham, I think is the best villain the series has had up until this point. They do quite a good job of establishing him as like an actual threat. At the same time, however, I still feel like the cars are the Achilles heel of this movie. Like they really want to establish some sort of personal animosity or stakes between Dom and Statham, but you can't do that if they're just driving and racing. And so they're constantly coming up with reasons for these people to like park their cars and have tense conversations. This manifests in like Dom repeatedly challenging Jason Statham to like an old-fashioned street fight, and Statham initially refusing, and he just brings guns to the battle, and I believe Dominic Toretto is saved by Kurt Russell, who is now featured as like a mainstay of the series, playing a character called Mr. Nobody. He's like a secret agent / benefactor for Dom and his team of car thieves who are now international mercenaries, I guess. They're basically the A-team at this point, is the way to think of it. And Mr. Nobody has their number. And this it concludes with Statham, after having had several opportunities to simply snipe Dominic Toretto in the head and move on with his life, and passing up on every single one of them for no reason. It concludes with them finally settling down to having a fight at the end, on the roof of a car park, wielding giant wrenches like lightsabers or like samurai swords, which I feel like if you were to write a parody sketch of the Fast and the Furious series, then having two men fighting with wrenches, the paraphernalia that you use to work on cars of any kind, really, is how you would do it. It's utterly ridiculous. And it ends with a man in a helicopter firing a rocket at them, which blows up part of the car park. Similarly, because it feels like maybe Jason Statham had it in his contract that he could not be beaten by Dominic Toretto. And so he is instead blown up by a helicopter, and he falls into a hole, at which point Dom says, that's the thing about street fights, the street always wins.
They're not on a street, they're on a car park.
Yep. And it wasn't even the tools of the street, i.e. your wrenches, that won. It was the helicopter with the missiles. Of course, after that, Dom gets in his Dodge Charger again, grabs a bag full of grenades, drives his car up the crumbling remains of the car park, flips his car into the air, hangs the bag of grenades on the side of the helicopter as it hovers in midair, and then someone else shoots the bag of grenades, I think The Rock maybe, so that the helicopter explodes. And Dom takes his he leaps from his exploding car as it tumbles through the air and lands on the street, perfectly safe.
Are you suggesting that that's not at all believable?
I'm suggesting yes, and it also becomes a theme. At this point, I think every film from here on features Dom leaping from an exploding car, tumbling out of the car door as it's on fire, bursting into flames.
There's also a bit where Letty, played by Michelle Rodriguez, sort of does 180 in her vehicle, so it extends the back end over a cliff edge for Brian to catch the spoiler as he falls past, which I say I enjoyed. But I mean, it is. I mean, the cars do just operate on such a alien and fickle sense of physics here that it's, in my notes I have it as Drivatar, the last car bender. But it just makes it impossible to invest really in anything that's happening on screen. And even the fist fights, I mean, they do have The Rock and Statham, and they do some good wrestling, but then they also have Tony Jaa on cast, and they completely waste him in a fight with the obvious non-martial artist Paul Walker. And to the extent where they're often cut between shots from the same angle, which is bizarre. And yeah, I think they have some ideas in them. They seem to have stolen a few camera tricks in the raid, and the stunt coordinator has good ideas for individual moves, but they just can't undo the fact that they're chopped to pieces. And outside of the action, there's just too much talking. There's just too much shit about the Toretto family. But it's just, I mean, I know you were setting this up as being sort of the through line for the series, which sort of anchors it in a way, but I just think it's a terrible myth. And the shit family, all of these, every second that these wank jobs spend discussing family is a second in which Jason Statham isn't wrestling a big man. And that's a mistake, Grant.
Yeah, at this point, I feel like the film has introduced a lot of movie stars that are much more charming than Vin Diesel. And again, I feel like I've become the negative one about Vin Diesel, and I quite like him, but I don't think he's as good as Dwayne Johnson or Jason Statham. Well,
I think he's becoming increasingly one note over the course of this series as well. He's just sort of has a sort of slightly winced face that could be sort of. It's not clear what expression he's trying to pull. It's sort of just very locked down. I think it's meant to insinuate some deeper thought to which the audience doesn't have access, but it isn't a charismatic performance anymore, I don't think. And also it doesn't help that Vin Diesel's neck has just been completely subsumed by his shoulders now. He is just a cone of meat in a vest.
It's also I don't feel like Vin Diesel has any compelling motivation. His motivation here is that he's pursuing the killer of Han, but we saw Han die fully 4 movies ago in a car crash that was only retconned after the fact to be caused by Jason Statham. Whereas I'm actually much more moved by Dwayne Johnson being blown out of a window by Jason Statham in the opening moments of this film, and therefore that being his reason. And I'm also much more the scenes with Dwayne Johnson in the hospital with his daughter are much more interesting and light and fun than any scene involving Dom and his family. You also get the nice moment where Dwayne Johnson flexes his arm in order to cause a cast around his arm to smash, which I quite liked. It's also there was a couple of Tony Jaa is wasted. I do like the moment where Paul Walker pushes a table towards him, and Tony Jaa walks kind of backwards up a wall and then does a kind of backflip and kicks Paul Walker in the face. That's quite satisfying. The director, James Wan, is, however, kind of obsessed with turning the camera upside down anytime a character kind of rolls. He has the camera follow, which feels like a trick borrowed from something like The Raid, but
yeah,
it does it kind of 3 times, and every time with diminishing returns. And also, the other thing I wanted to know in this film was Roman Pearce. Just at this point, we haven't talked about him in 5 films. He's still here.
Yeah, he's slowly making this transformation to being the most unlikable character, not only in cinema, but also within the fiction of the universe. Everybody just drags him all the time, and he's absolutely disgusting. and he's the butt of every joke. I don't know if that is like a delicious irony or whether this is just a greater call for his excision from the franchise. I don't know.
This is the film where Roman Pearce's hero moment is that he sings Happy Birthday badly. Like, that's the only thing he successfully does is cause a ruckus by disrupting a party. Everything else he tries in this movie, he fails at. So it's not just that every character is constantly ripping into him and that he is total trash. He is also completely incompetent. He has no reason to be there at any point. Whereas, like other characters, like Ludacris, for example, whose character name I can't remember, but he was introduced originally as like a really good mechanic. Now he's the crew's hacker. So like that's quite a character journey that's never explained. With Roman Pearce, they don't do that with. He was in the first 10 minutes set him up as he is good at driving and he's good at fighting and he can steal cars. And 6 movies later, he's not good at those things anymore or anything else.
Yeah. Do you want to move on to the Fate of the Furious?
Yes. So I like that Fast and the Furious 8 is called The Fate of the Furious. This is what I mean about the naming. I keep bringing up the box office, and box office isn't reflective of artistic quality or anything. And this series proves it, because Furious 7, budget $190 million. It made $1.5 billion. Like the series has doubled in size for the last 3 entries, from like $360 million to $780 million to now $1.5 billion. It is ridiculous. And Furious 8 continues in kind. So this feels like a film which is yearning to break free from the baggage of the previous films. Like, everything we've just said about how Dom is feeling one note and a lot of the other characters are feeling more compelling or like better movie stars. This film feels like the one that maybe knows it. Famously, The Rock and Vin Diesel don't get on. This also feels like maybe the film that's the reason why, because The Rock is very almost just the main character and star of this. And he's in a much better film than Vin Diesel is. So we kind of get this like opening setup where The Rock is coaching his kids' soccer team and has trained them to do a kind of Maori chant before matches in the way that the New Zealand rugby team does. It's quite kind of adorable. It's fun. The Rock is charming. He's like loves his kids, and he's like chewing out this agent that is trying to compel him to take on a job, taking down a cyber terrorist called Cipher, who we will learn is played by Charlize Theron, who is a good actress and a really fantastic action star who is completely wasted by this movie. Dom, meanwhile, he's off on his honeymoon with Letty in Havana when he gets kind of dragged away by Charlize Theron's character because she shows him something that we as the audience don't see but later discover is a photo of his son that we didn't know he had. It turns out that the police officer lady that he was dating when he thought Letty was dead had his child but never told him. And she and her son have been kidnapped by Cipher in order to compel Dom to go rogue and turn evil and turn against his former team and steal a bunch of things for her so that she can, it's not entirely clear, launch nuclear Armageddon, hold politicians accountable. There are an interminable number of scenes between Charlize Theron and Vin Diesel in which they gurn at one another on a plane, and you learn nothing about either one of them. It is a kind of like nasty dirge of a film. While around that, The Rock is having great adventures with Dom's crew, and Jason Statham is back because and his mum, played by fucking Helen Mirren.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fully happy for her to gild her retirement fund with the gains from these films. But yeah, she deserves to be in better films, really.
But she's playing this like really fun, I don't know, it's not Cockney, but like a kind of slang talking, old fashioned London thief, who is the mother of Jason Statham's character. Jason Statham, who was previously set up as like murderous supervillain who killed one of the main cast members, is now sort of being like softened and turned into he's just a lovable rogue, really, and it absolutely works because you like Jason Statham anyway, so secretly you want him to hang around. There's some really fun action sequences where I think The Rock gets sent to prison for reasons I don't remember, even though I watched this film like a week ago. And then there's maybe it's Mr. Nobody that does it, that releases all the cages so all the prisoners can escape. This, of course, sets Jason Statham's character free at the same time. Jason Statham sort of parkours his way through the building. I don't know if you've ever seen a film with Jason Statham in it. Doesn't look like a man who can do parkour, and he's definitely not. Like, every action he performs in that is a cut to like a 2-second shot of a man where you can't see his face because he cannot do any of the moves. The result of which is that they can't have a single continuous shot of Jason Statham moving from one side of the room to the other. It's a really weird skill to give that actor in particular, when what he's good at is like looking serious and shooting and punching. But never mind, that's like a fun sequence. The Rock is good, Jason Statham is good. And it leads up to this like action sequence at the end, which I think is really fun, which is Jason Statham boarding Charlize Theron's plane in order to get back Vin Diesel's child. And so he's with his brother, Luke Evans, who also returns and is also good now, but he's only in it for like 3 seconds. Like, even once they board the plane, Luke Evans disappears in a way that suggests that maybe they only had him for a day of filming, and so he couldn't actually take part in any of the action. But never mind, that's fine. But you get to watch Jason Statham shoot his way through this entire plane full of goons while holding a baby carriage in one hand with a little baby in it that's got headphones in it. And so every time he kills 3 people, he then has a little cute moment with the kid to check the kid's okay. That's good fun. It's not as good as it should be because if Gary Gray is directing it and not particularly well, or it's the editor's fault, I'm not sure. But it still has a problem where it can't show you everything it needs to in a shot, and the cuts don't match up. The pacing of the action sequences are still worse than they ought to be, but there are good ideas in here. And then Vin Diesel running through it in this nasty film where he's just talking to Charlize Theron and she never gets to leave the plane or do anything. What did you make of it?
I feel your thoughts are a mirror of mine, Graham. I do think that we sort of reached at the pinnacle of this series with the 6th film, which was tantalizingly almost enjoyable. But now it's sort of given way, and outside of a few dotted scenes, which I really enjoy, the ones we mentioned, it's sort of just baffling, self-serious paeans to family and just addled CG set pieces that just don't reach continuity, and Roman shrieking, obviously. Also, Vin Diesel's Brazilian cop stopgap wife, who's the mother of his child, is now murdered, just fridged instantaneously to ensure that the suddenly alive again, defrosted Michelle Rodriguez can return. And Michelle Rodriguez is herself completely content to adopt her love rival's orphan. No questions asked, because that's just what women do, isn't it? Whatever a man wants them to do. Apparently.
Yep.
But yeah, I appreciate this film only for underwriting the better projects that Helen Mirren and Charlize Theron will go on to do. It's sort of like the National Lottery, sort of a tax on the stupid masquerading as harmless fun, which helps to fund better art projects. In fact, one of the art projects that it funded is essentially Hobbs and Shaw, the spin-off. The 9th film. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
Before we move on to that, like, I do think, like, Michelle Rodriguez is a believable human being in these films, and I want to commend her for that because she has died and then come back and been evil and lost her memory and then switched to the good side but continued to have no memory and is now beginning to get her memories back and now has a child. And although that is completely absurd at every point, she is one of the few cast members who, when she emotes, I recognize what emotion it is she's trying to convey.
Yeah.
And there are points in which, her kind of existential crisis or like her identity crisis. So, I feel actually empathy for her. I see what she is going through, and that's rare within this series. I also want to shout out the kind of climax of this movie. I referenced before how it becomes a motif that Vin Diesel is going to jump out of a car as it explodes. You would think that this would be some sort of peak, but actually I think the next film tops it. But in this one, Cipher takes control of a nuclear submarine and is pursuing them across ice, pursuing the whole gang as they drive their cars. At this point, Vin Diesel, he's rejoined them, he's good again. And this sequence makes no fucking sense from a continuity point of view. Like, the number of Russian military that are following them changes between shots so that there are always new Russian cars to explode the next time the nuclear sub pops up through the ice behind them. Like, you will see that there are 5 cars chasing them. All 5 will be exploded by the nuclear submarine. And then in the next shot, there's just another 6 now for some reason. It's not clear where they're coming from. They're on a completely open plane, so it's not like they were just around the corner or anything like that. But this culminates with the nuclear submarine firing a heat-seeking missile at Dom's car, which he, swerves to avoid, drives back towards the submarine, hits a ramp of broken ice, flips over the submarine. The missiles hit the submarine, which explodes, catching Dom's car on fire, and then seemingly igniting the nuclear warheads inside it, which explode in the parts of the submarine that are underneath the water. And then, as Dom's car flips through this basically nuclear explosion, he just leaps out the car door and lands on the ice and sort of rolls 15 feet away from the burning submarine. It is a new level. I don't want to say peak for the series, but it feels like the absolutely absurd action has reached a height that surely it cannot top at this point until you see F9. We'll come back to that later.
Yeah. So before we get to the final, unfortunately, it's not going to be the final installment in this series. But before we get to F9, the most recent, there is also the spin-off film, starring Jason Statham and Dwayne Johnson as the main heroes. Hobbs and Shaw, or actually the Fast and Furious Presents, Hobbs and Shaw, directed by David Leitch, who's done a series of hyper-violent action films, including John Wick and Atomic Blonde, and Nobody was the most recent one. I actually genuinely straight up enjoyed this. Like, I think it's a good film. I all it took was a new writer, director, and cast. I think if this is the result of Vin Diesel and The Rock's beef, then I say hooray for beef. I think it's a treat. The plot, such as it is that The Rock's jumbo-sized DEA agent and Statham's not rogue, former terrorist, spy, criminal hero, they team up together with Jason Statham's spy sister, the excellent Vanessa Kirby, who's also excellent in the Mission Impossible franchise. She's been framed here by a super soldier terrorist in the shape of Idris Elba for the murder of her own MI6 cell. During the period in which she escapes from Idris Elba and he murders her MI6 cell, she also injects herself with a dose of super virus that she was trying to steal from Elba's organization. And what follows is a race against time to essentially find the means to extract the virus before it awakens within her and kills her and also all of humankind. So they have gone, they've gone the full way for the stakes there. And at the end, they end up in Samoa for a tower defense sequence. And it's a total unabashed cartoon. I think it's really fun.
I agree, actually. I cheated when we were watching these films back because after watching, I think it was Fast 6, I wanted to die, and so I skipped ahead a little bit and watched Hobbs and Shaw because I'd heard it was better and it was right. And I do think these films make a pretty good case for the validity of movie stars and the exorbitant fees that they demand. Because I think Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham and Idris Elba and Vanessa Kirby and Fair are just have a watchable quality, which most of the cast of the main series films just lack. And the script is a lot lighter and poppier. It's actually, you mentioned that it's by a whole new writer. It's supposedly not. It's supposedly, like, one of the screenplay credits is Chris Morgan, who wrote most of the other films.
Yeah,
it's also co-credited to Drew Pearce, who was co-writer on Iron Man 3. And so, like, he's got, better credibility. But
there's no way, though, that this film was not script doctored by Rob Delaney, who also has a cameo role in it, as does Ryan Reynolds. But you can just, like, everything the whole bickering between the two leads in this film has the petulant insult craft of Rob Delaney. There's no way that he didn't have a bigger hand in this film, I would say. I mean, it doesn't quite always land, because I think in some of its broader physical comedy is a bit strained, and I don't think that the two leads always quite manage to negotiate the subtleties of that kind of banter, because it's in the way it's scripted. You can tell that it's meant to move from, like, these devastatingly caustic jibes to just sort of resorting ultimately to spluttering juvenile flailing, and the arguments are meant to get more desperate and, like, self-defeating, but that doesn't quite percolate down to the notes that Johnson and Statham have received, because they just deliver all of the sort of dud jibes with the same sort of unabashed confidence as any other line. But it still manages to be a really funny film, I think, with a lot of good one-liners and, a great cast. Idris, like you say, every single cast member here would, in the main franchise, eclipse every other actor. Like, Idris Elba is just great as a snarling supervillain. Eddie Marsan's in it, attempting to do a Russian accent by way of literally every nation around the world. Vanessa Kirby is just a really great and adaptable actress, and she has, like, the charisma to go toe to toe with even The Rock's ego, I think. So it's a good match. And, like, you might not even notice this achievement in any other film, but just the composition of the film with its flashbacks and intercutting, it shows like a wit and a verve that is just completely absent from the main franchise, which my notes here describe as a bromidic dirge. So, yeah.
I think it helps. Like, the verve that you're talking about does help with Ryan Reynolds and also Kevin Hart delivering a lot of the exposition in uncredited cameos. Like, I saw the film get criticism because The Rock clearly has a massive ego, and these are characters that just show up and fawn over The Rock and tell The Rock how great he is. Like, Ryan Reynolds is just in love with The Rock. Kevin Hart meets them on a plane and immediately wants to join the gang because he loves them so much. And so I could see how that would be grating to some people. But compared to the interminably long, dull, gross exposition scenes in most of the other films, like, you get the impression in F8, for example, that they really want Charlize Theron to be like this evil philosophical mastermind. Like, they want her to be the kind of Bond villain they can bring back, and audiences immediately are like electrified. Oh, how is she going to interact? But none of those scenes land. Whereas the kind of equivalent expositional scenes in this, or like longer conversational scenes even, with Kevin Hart and Ryan Reynolds, are just poppy and fun, such that I would be much more compelled to see these actors come back inside a glass box for no apparent reason in a future film in the series.
Yeah, I like that it largely abandons cars as the principal vector for action as well. I think that seems really important. And it uses edits to explain action rather than obscure it, that seems just to be the hallmark of a competent director, which I guess the series has not thus far seen.
That was the other thing I wanted to flag is, like the climactic action sequence where they go to Samoa, which again is presumably a thing that The Rock demanded in his contract. it benefits a lot by the fact that it's on a human scale. Like they're not flipping cars over nuclear submarines as they explode. In fact, vehicles don't really play much of a part at all in it.
Or in the climax, I do think they do eject a car into a helicopter, don't they? I think at some point.
Yeah, but that's small potatoes compared to.
Yeah, they don't backflip through a nuclear explosion at any point. So.
Yeah, and
even though this
point,
is perhaps the most sci-fi of all the films, in that Idris Elba is literally a Superman in this.
Yeah, he's got the Crisis nanosuit, literally. Like he has a magic suit that makes him extra strong, and he can run really fast. And he's also got a really cool bike. So there are some vehicular things. He's got like a remote control bike. He can kind of summon to him like a horse in Skyrim.
Shall we finish it? Shall we do the 10th film in the sequence, F9?
Yes, although I'm reminded, I think we missed an action sequence I wanted to shout out. Because in one of the previous films, I can't remember if it's F8 or F7, they drive a sports car between several skyscrapers in Dubai.
Yeah, that's the one where Roman sings, I believe. I can't remember which film that is.
That would be F7. I thought it was F7, but I didn't say it at the time because I thought I must have got muddled up. But nope, it was F7. That's a cool action sequence. That almost works for me. Even the gravity and physics of it almost worked for me. So there we go. One nice thing in these 10 films. On to F9. I watched this on Monday. When did you see it?
I think the same day, yeah.
So this is picking up where F8 left off. Letty and Dom are once again in hiding, only now they've got a kid. The kid is a toddler. They pretty early on meet up with the rest of the squad, the rest of the old crew, who try to draw them back into a life of crime because Mr. Nobody, Kurt Russell, his plane has gone down somewhere in South America and they're being drafted in to go find him. They were sent a message that was sent only to them. Dom doesn't want to go initially because he doesn't want to leave his kids. Maybe he's changed, but Letty decides that she's going to go because she doesn't like that they're hiding. Dom pretty quickly changes his mind, and then that reluctance he had to take part or any kind of like emotional through line about his responsibility to his child now he's a parent is just not explored at all over the rest of the film. Instead, it's just like almost note for note the same kind of capering sci-fi spy film as the previous one, as F8 is. Like beat for beat or scene for scene, there is a lot of repetition in this movie that I think makes it even worse than what was already pretty light, silly fare. So this time around, the villain is
John Cena.
John Cena, that's his name. The villain is John Cena, who it turns out is Dom's brother, as we are told through a series of flashbacks. Which is again
the number of lampshades they have to hang on the fact that they don't look alike. It's pretty amazing. It's a genetically very dissimilar man, and I think he's described by Roman as driving literally like a bat out of hell.
Yep,
brilliant.
And like there were references to Dom's past in the previous films. Like he does tell a story at one point to someone in one of the early films about his dad dying in a car race and Dom beating the crap out of the driver he held responsible and going to prison for it. In that anecdote, he doesn't mention a brother. At no point is a brother mentioned. But, I guess if you're going to retcon people back alive, then as they have done with Letty, then it's okay. And as they do with Han in this film. So we've caught up and we've surpassed the Tokyo Drift timeline. And now we discover that not only was it retconned so that Jason Statham was the person responsible for killing Han, it was now being retconned so that Han was, it seems like, actually a hologram. Created by Mr. Nobody, because you see Mr. Nobody and Han on a room, like looking out over the crash. and you see Han like vanish in a second from the vehicle. So like it seems like it's just technical wizardry, and I guess the car was remote controlled. I don't know.
But I think it's really important they brought Han back. You know, the guy whose personality is he eats crisps. I think he was really sorely missing from the franchise.
Well, it's important to remember that this is the directorial return of Justin Lin back to the series. And so, of course, he had to bring his friend along with him. He found some reason for his friend to still be in it. Couldn't set it as a prequel anymore because they'd already done the Han revenge movie. So this time, John Cena is the bad guy, but he's also working for this like Russian billionaire who is like poorly developed. Sorry?
I'm not sure where he's from. I think it might be Georgia, actually.
Is it?
Because they're in Tbilisi at some point. But
apologies. This Georgian billionaire who is it seems like the son of, is it the prime minister or something like that? And so he has issues and wants more power and respect, but to be honest, it's never really developed. And John Cena's motivation for any of the things he's doing at this point are not well developed, beyond the fact that he doesn't like that he's had to live in Dom's shadow. And Dom holds him responsible for the death of their father and asked him to leave town, I guess, 20 years ago. And 20 years later, he's decided that the way to deal with it is, you know, being like an evil spy guy. I mean, like he does say, like he's been working and doing missions for Mr. Nobody for most of that time. I'm still not entirely clear why he ultimately turns evil, but also back. Sorry, go on.
Well, there's a suggestion that he is the rogue agent and not Luke Evans in the previous film, to which the rogueness was being referred. If that makes any sense. Anyway, I don't know. It's a terrible retcon. It doesn't matter.
I mean, Luke Evans was also actually evil, though. So
I know.
Also returning is Cipher, played by Charlize Theron. She's inside a glass box now. Why? Don't know. Like, I both don't know why she's in this movie particularly. Like, they didn't establish her as an interesting enough villain or character in the last film to justify her survival and returning. It's also not clear why the baddies that are kind of using her are keeping her inside a glass box.
Well, like, she needs her entire point of this. The point of her presence in this film is, though, at some point she can take over the role of the bad guy, allowing John Cena to have reconciliation with Dom, because that is so inevitable from the second you hear that Dom's brother is out there causing mayhem. You know, oh well, he's going to become a good guy by the end of this film. That's happened to The Rock. It's happened to Jason Statham. It's happened even to Luke Evans. It's going to happen again with John Cena. I have to give it credit though for some of the way that it sort of uses the past. It flashes back a lot to Dom's childhood and the fateful car crash and the events surrounding it. And like the last few films have strayed so far from drag racing, thank God, and also the low-level LA criminality. I mean, the crew are now just this globe-trotting gang of CIA-backed vigilantes, basically, who take on entire armies. I do think that it helps to sort of ground it in a weird way, even though I'm not at all affectionate towards the series past. Like, it does find some, and I find drag racing to be shit and extraordinarily boring, but it does find this sort of like connective thread back to the series origins, which I think was probably a worthwhile endeavor. But then there are so many flashbacks, not just about Dom's brother, but like about what Han was doing since his death. And, you know, there's just a huge amount of exposition to kind of wedge him back into it. It's just, I mean, it's so retconny, but it instead of just breezing past this stuff, which would be, you know, borderline acceptable, it just fruitlessly labors to explain stuff. And there's so much needless exposition. And just stop these characters talking, please. There's so much self-important whiffle about family. At one point, Dom pulls down a concrete building with his bare hands and then has an out-of-body experience in a plunge pool. It's just, you don't need any of that stuff. You really don't. Just womp men. Womp men real good. That's what it needs.
Did you understand why Dom did that? Like,
no. He's meant to be buying time for the others to escape, but then Letty stays 4 feet away for the entire duration of that sequence.
Yeah, and they'd kind of already, it seemed like, won because they used the giant electromagnets. We playing with magnets now, as Roman says in the trailer. Although I think that line's actually not in the final film. They used the giant magnets in order to pull the guns out of all the bad guys' hands. And then, like, when Dom wakes up after, like, his self-sacrificial fight where he tells Letty to tell their kid that he loves her, and destroys a fucking concrete walkway and falls into the plunge pool. Like, when he wakes up, Letty's just there, and all the rest of the gang are still just there. Like, none of them were escaped. They just defeated the bad guys. They're still in the same place. I don't understand, like, why did he stay behind? It's not, like, the staging of it makes no sense as an action sequence.
I mean, there's quite a lot of that, isn't there? I mean, some of it's fun in the kind of ridiculous, once per film, get out of jail free card sort of nonsense. There's one point where Dom drives a car off a cliff quite early on, and he catches a steel wire around his wheel axle and swings the entire car like Tarzan. But then there's the part with the electromagnets, which is they manage to steal these electromagnets and arm their cars with them so that they can sort of manipulate the vehicles that are pursuing them. And it's a cool concept, and I think it's a fun way to sort of like approach the construction of like an action spectacle to build it around a gimmick. But it's just they just don't care about using it consistently. So the gimmick becomes meaningless. It's just meaningless magic, And I don't feel like these films ever set out to solve the problems that would be interesting, that would make the action film, the action sequences feel like they had a point. I don't think they even understand what a magnet is. They don't even understand percentages. Like at one point they're trying to stop this critical upload. And it reaches 100% before they stop it. And then they stop it. And everybody's like, yeah, we did it. And I mean, like, no, no, you didn't. That's what 100% needs. It got all the way there. You didn't stop it.
It's also just beat by beat following the steps of F8, though. So, like, all the magnet stuff and those action sequences are happening at the same, within minutes, I would imagine, of the same moments in F8 where they have the ability to remote control cars. And so like in F8 you get this kind of like, it's like one of those combined Trackmania replays, if you've ever seen that, where they have like hundreds of vehicles flowing through the streets in a river or falling out of buildings. And like they obviously liked that and thought that was a cool thing, and so they needed a new cool thing for the action sequences in this one, and so their idea was magnets. And like even the expositional scenes or like the character scenes, such as they are just following the exact same pattern of like Roman and Tej, who's Ludacris's character, if I've remembered his name, sitting talking to the new lady hacker that joined them a couple of movies ago, and like bickering and hitting on her, and she being exasperated and walking away. Like, we've seen that same scene play out like 6 times now across the last 2 or 3 films. And like, there's been no character development. And in this one, there's not even a hint of a joke. Like, in the previous films, there was at least an attempt at a joke. Like, something that you're like, okay, that had like a setup and punchline structure. I understand that was supposed to be your joke. It's not funny, but well done, you tried. Whereas in F9, I feel like there's not even the setup and punchline. It feels like someone copy-pasted the script from F8 and then rewrote the words for each line to mimic what the last one was doing without quite ever understanding or like grappling with the underlying character motivation or plot motivation or anything. It's really odd.
I'd say the one good thing about the setting of stunts in this film, or rather just physical space, is that the previous films just don't care about physical space, or very rarely care about it. And in this installment, the budget has now grown sufficiently large that they can hire like a team of thousands of artists to CG composite landscapes together. And in one of the opening sequences, I forget where it is. I think it's in South America somewhere. You get like maybe 6 different, quite grand establishing shots to show you this environment of all the cars coming into this abandoned base. And it doesn't make anything less stupid, but it does mean that you can at least see where everything is meant to be. But then it sort of undermines this by doing the same thing it's always done, which is to cut far too much. There's like a sequence in which John Cena is on a zip line. It takes him 5 minutes of film time to get down that zip line because it keeps on cutting away to a fist fight in a van. And like both of those scenes would be better if not intertwined. Like, I mean, I wonder if the intercutting was used to disguise the fact that Vin Diesel chasing the ziplining Cena around Edinburgh didn't turn out to be a particularly coherent concept by itself, and maybe they used the intercutting to disguise that. But it's just it makes everything. It makes your investment sort of get drained in each of the individual sequences by just you lose sense of where you are in the fight or in the chase.
I feel like the intercutting in that sequence might have been there to disguise the fact that Vin Diesel has obviously never been to Edinburgh in his entire life. Like, there are establishing shots of John Cena where he seems to be legitimately standing on a rooftop in Edinburgh, but there is no point in that sequence in which it's not absolutely clear that Vin Diesel and his Dodge Charger haven't been composited into the Edinburgh streets after the fact. Like, he looks really out of place. And then during a lot of the chase sequences, he looks really obviously CG, and so does John Cena, because they maybe couldn't get permission to like leap between moving vehicles, or maybe COVID was in effect when they were filming those parts, and so they couldn't do it for that reason. The use of CG for actual replacing actors in this film is much higher than in the previous films. Like, in the previous films, you've always had scenes where characters, as we've discussed, land on bonnets or climb between cars or climb in through windows of moving cars and that sort of stuff. A lot of the time that's actually been done practically. You know, set a bunch of vehicles in motion, have them drive really slow, and an actor who's like wired on or whatever moves between them. But here you get weird, rubbery, slightly missized John Cena climbing in through a car door at one point, and lots of shots where Vin Diesel looks larger than he does in the scenes where he's his actual self and not a CG replacement. I mean, the action sequences have never been believable because the physics don't make any sense and the editing is terrible, but it's all the worse for the fact that they just keep turning into like bad rubbery CG men.
Yeah, there's one point in which Dom crashes into another car, flipping it over so that falling John Cena can bounce off its side as it crashes, and then in bouncing land on the bonnet of another car and save him.
Yep. He also at one point is in a long truck on its side sliding down a mountain, and he redirects the direction of the truck using a grenade explosion. Which I guess like culminates in... Well, first of all, before I say this, I want to say I keep bringing up Han and like the way he's shoehorned in. I actually don't mind that, because although his one character thing is that he eats crisps, I quite like the actor. I do find him a little bit charming, and so like that he's back, I'm happy with. And
how do you feel about the return of Sean from Tokyo Drift?
Well, I'll come on to that in a minute. Less good about that. But I don't mind the stuff about Han where he has been in Tokyo and drafted by Mr. Nobody and become an agent for him. For some reason, never telling his friends who also work for Mr. Nobody that he's still alive, and has basically got a kind of surrogate daughter who is now a ninja. He seems to find her when she's 11, and now she's clearly in her late teens, I guess. I still don't understand the chronology or timeline of these films, but whatever. I don't mind all that stuff. Like, that's quite fun. I like a lot less the return of Sean from Tokyo Drift, who returns with, I think, the same sidekicks as those movies who were helping him work on cars back then, where now they seem to be working for the military, I guess. I mean, it seems like a pretty stunning indictment of the US military that they have hired these people But they're introduced on a military base where they're strapping rockets to the roofs of cars and trying to drive faster than jet planes that are taking off from the same military base. Roman and Tej go see them for reasons I don't fully understand, because they need to be hooked up with some other vehicle or something, but we get a nice sequence of their rocket car, which is like a Pontiac or something like that, driving propelled by a giant rocket, seemingly successfully, and then exploding. And I thought this was a precursor to some sort of sequence where they would have to drive over a long distance extremely quickly, and so they would use a rocket strapped to the roof of a car in order to do this. But alas, no, it turns out to be much stupider than this. So much so that when I was telling a friend that we were doing this, that we were watching all of these Fast and the Furious films, and I was describing the nuclear submarine sequence, I joked that the only thing stupider that they could do would be going to space.
Oh dear.
Thinking that, well, that's a ludicrous... Not the actor, but but that's a stupid idea. They're not going to go. And I joked, about them docking with the International Space Station. So it turns out in this film, that's what they do. The upload that you refer to, I believe, is them uploading something to a satellite, and so they're going to go to try and fry the satellite using these magnets, which they have strapped to a Ford Pontiac along with a rocket, and they strap the whole thing to the roof of a plane, fly the plane into the air, and then launch the rockets, and Tej and Roman go to space. Literally outer space, in their car. Like that mannequin that Elon Musk placed inside his Tesla when he launched it into space. And they, have little air boosters that I guess they also put on the car so they can redirect its momentum in space. And they fly it over to the satellite that they're trying to destroy, discover that they can't use the magnets because they've been fried, and so they just drive straight through the satellite, which explodes. And then they drive on to the International Space Station and wave to the Russian astronauts inside, who presumably, I suppose, let them in, and they fly back on the next shuttle, I guess. I feel like no one's going to believe us that this is what happens in this film.
Yeah, I just also don't know what we're meant to feel about that sequence. Like it's obviously very silly, but also I just don't care. Like I don't know. I mean, it feels like it's at the one times reaching for a different register of silliness. Like it's gone full Moonraker at this point, but at the same time, it also just doesn't feel like it's given itself over to comedy in any way. There's still the two characters in the space car are still sort of mulling over their sense of destiny and their mortality and stuff. And, they don't mention family, but it's still in that kind of slightly somber, self-exploratory tone. And it's just completely unwarranted by the situation. There doesn't seem to be any reason for them to have done any of this either. I mean, surely they could have found a different way of approaching this problem.
Well, I don't fully understand why they do it either, but it seems to be why it works, even though they fail to stop the upload in time. The upload hits 100%, but they still destroy the satellite, so it's okay. So I feel like I miss a lot of the exposition in these films because it's delivered in such a dull way, often while simultaneously advertising Corona really explicitly for character dialogue. And so maybe I just missed a line that explained it, but it seemed like almost it was a plan B. Like, you guys try to stop the upload down here and we will go to space. As you say, it doesn't, like the register of it doesn't fit. It's also just, this is the point where I'm like, would I enjoy this if I had not watched the first 5 films? Because as I said at the beginning, I like dumb action fare. I don't need things to make sense. I'm okay with spectacle. I'm okay with CGI spectacle. I don't like. There is. If you describe this film to people, or F8, or to some extent F7 and F6, they go, "Oh, it sounds kind of fun." Like, if you just describe the plot without explaining the reasons why it's terrible or the characters are awful, then it just sounds kind of fun. And I wonder if I would enjoy this film more if it wasn't Roman Pearce going to space. If I hadn't watched the first 5 films and sat through so much dullard behavior and misogyny and hateful commercial placement of vehicles and like pornographic shots of rims, would I have more fondness for this? Would I like accept the movie on its own terms rather than feeling like just total derision for everyone involved? What do you think?
I don't think so, because I think the proof of that is the fact that it was possible for me to wholly enjoy Hobbs and Shaw.
But it doesn't have the cast, that's the thing. It's got like the characters that they introduced after film 5, and so they're like unburdened from a lot of that baggage, and they're the movie stars that are charismatic enough that they're that you kind of follow along with them.
Yeah, but I think there's also just a gulf of quality filmmaking there, right? As well as the change of cast. It isn't the thing that holds the Fast franchise back from for me is not simply the people they've got to play these characters, but the entire operation itself.
Yeah. I agree with that. I agree that this is like a bad example of a dumb action movie, but I feel like I've watched other bad examples of dumb action movies and still come away going, on a certain level it's satisfied. Whereas these movies, I find them almost entirely despicable.
Yeah. Yeah, these are films for people who listen to music through their phone speaker on public transport.
Yes.
I genuinely feel like I've wounded my soul by watching these films. I'm glad that you've also committed this act of self-harm. Importantly, how do you rank them?
Oh, that's
best to worst. I've got a list. I've got a list right here.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I think obviously Hobbs and Shaw is way easily the best. Then I would say the main series peak was number 6. What happens in number 6? I think that's the one with. Okay, that's the one with Luke Evans as the villain. I think. Then I'd probably I might put F9 in there. It's not a good film. Like all of these films from this point on are worse than Mission Impossible 2. I would say. Mission Impossible 2, not only the worst film of the Mission Impossible franchise, but also a despicable film. F9 is just kind of charmless. Charmless mush. Then I put F8, then F7, then F5, then F4. It's quite clearly chronological. But then I put probably F2, F1, and then finally the worst of the worst is Tokyo Drift, F3.
See, it's interesting that you thought the first film was worse than the second film.
It's quite close, I would say. It's quite close. I'd give the first film merit for being fresher in that it's the first of something, but I think the second film just in terms of it upgrading the way that it approaches shooting car chases, like there is some minor advancement in the way that it approaches putting together its action sequences. Otherwise, we're talking these are all meritless films that deserve to be erased from history. So it's can't put that much between them.
Okay, so I agree that Hobbs and Shaw is the best, like just by far. And then I would put 7 as the next one, which is the first one with Statham, where he's the villain, and I'm pretty sure that's the one with Abu Dhabi jumping between skyscrapers in a vehicle. Then 6, then 8, then 9, then 5, 4, then 1, then 2, then 3. So we're agreed that 3 is the worst. Tokyo Drift. And yeah, like, otherwise, the places where we disagree on the exact order doesn't matter, because these are all like 0 out of 10 films. It's like, it's a rounding error that we can even tell them apart.
I think that's it, isn't it? Have we learnt anything from doing this, doing whatever we did?
Not to do this?
Yeah.
I feel like there's so many terrible things in these films that we've had to skip over. Like, there's an entire gross sidekick character in the first 2 films that we didn't even mention at all, like, who's part of like Dom's crew in the first film, and you know, is like constantly fighting with Paul Walker's character because he wants to be with Mia and other stuff. We didn't mention it, but he's awful. Yeah. He's like Roman before Roman, but by the time you're at film 6, you've completely forgotten that he ever existed, even though he was actually in like 2 or 3 of the movies. We haven't talked about the weirdness of Dominic Toretto naming his kid Brian. Oh, man. Like, I wanted to ask you, could you describe Mia to me? Her personality. What's her personality?
Her personality is sister.
Bingo. Like, she comes back. They bring her back after having been written out in F7. They bring her back for F9. And it's just like, why? I guess she's there to sell the sibling drama.
Yeah, that makes more. I mean, that kind of works. I mean, although she doesn't actually. I mean, like, she's completely dismissed. John Cena turns up, and having captured the entire crew, he's just like, "Oh, sorry, Mia." And like,
yeah, you just cuddle at the end.
Yeah, it's like he, despite her being his sister, he only has a relationship with his brother, good or bad. And whatever he feels for his sister is just an adjunct to that. And she is an adjunct to the entire film.
Yeah, Mia is like instantly put on a plane and sent to Tokyo with Letty to go eventually track down Han. But I feel like you could do that with a lot of these characters. Like, even after 9 films, I feel like most of them don't have any personality. Even the ones you only like because of the actor or because of a very brief affectation, like they eat a lot of crisps. So that's where I'm at after 10 films of this. They've already announced that they're going to make, I think, at least 1 more, possibly 2 more of these. 2, I
think, yeah. There's an all-female-led film.
Is there?
Yeah, I wonder. Apparently, Charlize Theron is going to come back for that. Whether she's being retconned into surviving the ending of F9 or whether this is going to be another prequel, I don't know. I wonder if they're going to.
She lives at the end of F9. Oh, yes, of course
she does. Sorry, yeah, it's a fake out, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, she's piloting a drone, and so they make a point of showing you her walking away.
Oh, yes. Good point. I wonder if they'll resurrect Gal Gadot as well. Why not?
I mean, when she died, you never saw, and no one ever seemed to go check for a body, and there was no funeral or anything like that. Like, there was nothing. It was clearly set up in a way that she could come back at any point. Presumably to be the mother to Han's new adopted ninja teenager daughter. So what I wanted to ask is, will you watch them? Like, we've technically completed Fast and the Furious now. When there's F10, will you watch it?
Oh, no, absolutely not. No, I'm definitely done. I mean, I was done after F8 actually, but then the lure of doing this as a podcast brought me back. But without some other reason, I don't think I could ever return to this sequence.
See, I will watch it now.
Oh no,
that is it for the rest of my life. Like, I remember thinking my friends at secondary school were idiots when we were 16, and they said that the original Fast and the Furious was their favorite movie because I was a total snob. And I eventually got over my snobbery, and now I've discovered that I am right, that I was right to be a snob. But now I've watched 10 of these films, I may as well, anytime there's a new one, watch it. And I enjoy hating it. I will hate watch these films until I die.
I'll enjoy watching a Hobbs and Shaw sequel if one comes about. I believe there is one planned.
Yeah, I believe so.
Well, that's it. I think we've done our duty here. I'm sorry to you, Graham, and to everybody else involved. I'm deeply, deeply ashamed of what we've perpetrated here today. And future lock-ins probably won't be about the worst film franchise of all time. We'll pick better subjects. It's worth noting that backers on our Patreon will not be charged for these episodes.
Don't worry. Don't write in and complain.
But if you did want to back us for some reason for the main gaming podcast, you can do that at patreon.com/Crate And Crowbar. And you can find other nonsense by us on YouTube, youtube.com/Crate And Crowbar. You can tweet us at Crate And Crowbar, and you can join our lovely Discord community via the link on our website, which is sensibly enough crateandcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been Marsh Davis.
I've been Too Graham, Too Fabulous.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
It's been a bummer.